They say every small town has its secrets. And in this one, the most powerful man around, Colonel Bellamy, was hiding something no one could have imagined. It all started when Roger, a kind and humble farmer, found something in an old barn, and from that moment on, the truth slowly began to come out. While most people chose to stay quiet, Roger decided to take a stand, and what he did changed everyone's life. This is a story about courage, truth, and how one action can change everything. Stick around till the end, because this reveal is going to surprise you. Roger lived with his elderly parents on the modest farm their family had built generations ago. The land was simple, but it carried stories of hard work, resilience, and honor. Despite their age, his parents still cared for the farm with love and wisdom, passing down to Roger the legacy he now fiercely defended. Since he was a boy, Roger had learned to plant, harvest, and handle the hardships of rural life. He never felt rushed to start a family, even though his parents often gave him that warm, well-meaning advice. "Son, you need to build a family, someone to share your life with," his mother would say, sitting by the fireplace with hopeful eyes. "The right time will come, Mom," Roger replied with a calm smile. "I won't rush anything that isn't meant to be yet. Life has its own rhythm, and I'll respect mine." Solitude wasn't a burden for him, but a choice that gave him freedom to think, plan, and understand the world around him. From early on, Roger carried a painful memory. Colonel Bellamy, a ruthless and powerful man who years ago started surrounding his family with threats. He vividly remembered the day the colonel arrived at their farm with his men, demanding payments his family simply couldn't afford. Roger's father tried to negotiate, but the colonel wouldn't hear excuses. In a brutal move, he punched the old man in the stomach, knocking him to the ground, gasping for air. "Think you can dodge my demands?" the colonel sneered, preying on the weak to show his power. That night, after dinner, Roger's father sat down with him and said, "Son, forget about it. Might makes right. This man has too much power, and anyone who fights him ends up badly." But Roger never accepted that passive view. "Dad, I can't just stand by and watch this happen. I won't let him take what's ours," he said firmly, feeling the fire of rebellion grow inside. The town they lived in was small, full of whispered stories and suspicious glances. Roger spent most of his time on the farm but often went to the market, where he bought supplies, chatted with neighbors, and most of all, observed. That's when he felt Colonel Bellamy's weight the most. The colonel wasn't just the richest man around. He was the absolute ruler of that patch of land. Always flanked by his henchmen, he strutted arrogantly, controlling everything and everyone with a steely glare. One bright morning, Roger was walking through the market stalls when he saw a scene that seemed to replay from his childhood. The colonel stood in the center of the square, glaring down at a humble fruit vendor, a man with rough hands and a sun-weathered face. The vendor tried to explain, voice trembling. "Colonel, the fruit is good. I'm just asking for a chance to prove the value of my work." Bellamy laughed scornfully, then grabbed a basket full of colorful fruit and threw it all to the ground, crushing it in the dusty square. The sharp sound of fruit smashing silenced the crowd. "Think you can fool me, you poor fool?" the colonel shouted, his voice heavy with authority. "This stuff's rotten, not worth a penny. Who wants old fruit that only brings pests and clutters my barn with trash?" He pointed his finger arrogantly at the crowd. "A chance? I'm the one who decides what's worth anything around here. And you'll learn to sell whatever I say." The vendor hung his head, swallowing bitter humiliation. The crowd stood frozen, as if fear had tied their tongues and bodies. As Bellamy strode among the stalls, the air grew even heavier. It was as if the man carried an invisible shadow crushing every spark of courage. People bowed their heads, looked away, some even stepped back, afraid of what might come next. Roger stood there in the middle of it all, feeling the colonel's arrogance hit his chest like a blow. That was the harsh reality of the town. Colonel Bellamy ruled supreme, frightening, humiliating, and crushing anyone who dared oppose him. But inside Roger burned a different fire, a fierce will not to bow down, not to accept injustice as his fate. He knew something was deeply wrong. He felt it in his bones, saw it in the eyes of others. Fear was the chain that kept that power untouchable. Yet Roger refused to live under that shadow forever. From that day on, a plan began to form in his mind. He needed to uncover what really lay behind Colonel Bellamy's power, and maybe, just maybe, change everything. Night fell over the farm, and inside the modest wooden house, a warm light filled the simple room. Roger, his father, and his mother sat down to dinner. The smell of homemade food lingered in the air, but the mood was tense. After a few moments of silence, Roger couldn't hold back the weight in his chest any longer. "Today at the market, I saw something that made me even more determined," he began, looking into his parents' tired eyes. "I saw Colonel Bellamy humiliate a simple man, a fruit vendor who just wanted to work honestly. The colonel threw his fruit to the ground, mocked him publicly. It was cruel, inhuman." His father sighed and ran his hand over his face. "Son, life's tough, I know. But that man's got way too much power. It's not worth fighting something we can't win." Roger's mother, worried, took his hands gently. "Please, son, just forget it. Leave Colonel Bellamy to his whims and commands. It'll only bring you pain." But Roger kept his gaze steady, his voice full of conviction. "No, Mom. I can't just ignore it. This isn't just a humiliation for one man. It's punishment for all of us. For anyone who wants to live with dignity." He squeezed her hands. "I'm going to expose the colonel, Mom. Show this whole town who he really is." His promise hung in the air, strong and unwavering. Tears welled up in his mother's eyes, mixed with fear and pride. "God protect you, my son. But be careful. He doesn't forgive those who try to take him down." Roger nodded, feeling this decision would change his life forever. Word spread through the town like wildfire. There was an opening to work on Colonel Bellamy's huge farm. It wasn't just any job. Few got hired there, and fewer still came out unscathed. But Roger saw it as the chance he needed. If he wanted to uncover the secrets behind the colonel's power, he'd have to get inside the heart of that fortress. The next morning, dressed in simple but sturdy clothes, he walked up to the farm's gate. The place was huge, with fields stretching to the horizon, barns and rustic buildings, all surrounded by a tall fence made of old wood. The foreman greeted him with a cold look, clearly not fond of new faces. "What do you want here?" he asked, voice hard. "I heard there's an opening in the garden," Roger said, trying to sound confident. "All right," the foreman muttered, sizing him up. "If you can handle the work, you start bright and early tomorrow. But I warn you, no slackers, no screw-ups." Roger nodded, knowing he'd have to be more than careful. On his first day, Roger's body felt the brutal weight of labor under the blazing sun. The hours dragged as he tended the plants, watered carefully, pulled weeds, and tried to keep the garden spotless. But even through the exhaustion, his eyes missed nothing around him. The farmhands weren't many, but there was something different about them, a weariness that went beyond the body. It was a weight on the soul, a shadow that seemed to follow them with every step, every glance. When Roger passed by, he felt their suspicious stares prick his skin like needles. To those men and women, he was an outsider, someone who might stir up secrets many wanted buried. At the end of the day, drained, Roger returned to the modest farmhouse. Dinner was quick and quiet. Later, sitting at the table with a lantern nearby, he opened a worn notebook and began to write. There, pen in hand, he turned feelings, details, and small happenings into a map of the truth he was trying to unravel. He noted the locked barn that no worker spoke of, a place shrouded in silence and mystery. He recorded hurried footsteps, broken whispers escaping when someone walked close by. And he always marked firmly the unsettling presence of the henchman Bruno, who watched every move, every word, as if guarding not just the farm, but secrets that couldn't be revealed. One afternoon, while working near the barn garden, Roger noticed something that made his heart race. A crack in the wooden door was slightly open, letting out muffled voices, words he couldn't catch clearly but that sounded heavy with tension. At that moment, he knew he was facing something far bigger than he imagined. It was there, in that thin space between light and shadow, that he would feel the true weight of what he was about to discover. Days passed, and the exhausting routine at Colonel Bellamy's farm seemed to drain Roger's strength. But despite the weariness in his muscles and body, something inside wouldn't settle. Restlessness grew, a silent voice kept insisting. Something was wrong in that place, hidden behind the barn's imposing facade, under the Colonel's rule. That afternoon, the sky was gray and heavy with thick clouds. A fine rain began to fall, soaking the dirt and chilling the air. Most of the workers were spread across the farm, busy with their tasks or taking shelter from the coming storm. Roger felt this was his moment. With slow, careful steps, he approached the barn, heart pounding, breathing steady to avoid making a sound. The shadows stretched long in the weak daylight, and the wind carried a heavy silence, almost suffocating. Getting close to the wooden door, Roger crouched down and spotted a small hole, maybe a gap left by a warped board. Just a narrow enough space for a sharp eye. He pressed his face to the opening and peeked inside. What he saw made his blood run cold. In the damp, poorly lit space, several women were huddled together, visibly pregnant. Their faces showed exhaustion, fear, and pain. The heavy atmosphere seemed to trap not just their bodies, but their very hope. Roger's heart tightened. Among those figures that looked more like shadows from a distance, he recognized the whispered stories from the town. Anna, the tailor's daughter, missing for months. She had turned down an invitation to a private dinner from Colonel Bellamy, and since then vanished without a trace. She was pregnant with her fiancé's child, who thought she had abandoned him. Martha, wife of the cowboy who mysteriously disappeared after starting to suspect the Colonel's dealings. She was taken by force, a cruel punishment for her loyalty to her husband. Now, she carried her late husband's child, fighting to protect that life's future. Rose, a girl from the town no one really seemed to know. Rumor said she'd work for the Colonel and after getting pregnant by him, was locked away so the shame wouldn't spread. Lucy, a former courtesan shunned by the town, once the Colonel's lover, used and discarded. When she got pregnant, she was imprisoned to prevent any scandal. And Cecilia, the youngest, only 20, innocent and victim of false job promises. The pregnancy had traumatized her, but she found strength and support in the other women, and now also in the man watching them, hidden there. Roger took a deep breath and, heart pounding, tried to say something to the women. But before he could speak, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Roger!" The call came from afar, firm and urgent. He froze, chest tight with fear. Without looking back, Roger quickly slipped away, heart racing as he blended into the workers, returning to his tasks, trying to seem calm though adrenaline coursed through his veins. After that heartbreaking sight, muffled voices from the barn, the gray sky, and the fine rain falling on the dry earth, Roger knew there was no turning back. He had to save those women, and now he was right in the middle of it. Rain mixed with sweat ran down his face, but the chill he felt wasn't from the weather, it was fear. He tried to get back to his routine, pretending to be natural, but there was no more room for naivety. His eyes, sharper than ever, caught dark details behind the wooden walls, in the hushed whispers, and in the evasive glances. Then, that very afternoon, under a heavy sky and distant thunder, things got more dangerous. As Roger approached the side of the barn again, trying to time his next move, a big, rough hand grabbed him by the collar with force. "Looking to get yourself killed, little farmer?" It was Bruno. His expression hard, eyes narrowed, body ready to strike. "You shouldn't even be near the barn," he said, voice low, slow, dripping with venom. "There's things in there that nosy men don't live to tell about." Roger swallowed hard. His heart pounded, but he tried to keep calm. He did what he knew he had to do, stepped back, lowered his gaze, played scared. "Sorry, just looking for a hoe." Got lost, that's all. Bruno loosened his grip slowly, fingers still tense. But before turning away, he paused for a second longer, enough for Roger to catch something unusual. A subtle hesitation, a strange silence in the henchman's eyes. A doubt hidden beneath that rough mask. Roger stayed still after Bruno walked off. The rain sounded louder now, and everything inside him screamed that time was running out. After witnessing that sad, devastating scene, the following days passed in silence and tension. The weight of what he knew kept him awake at night. Every muffled cry he remembered, every pale face of those trapped women, every belly marked by injustice, it all pushed him to act. Calmly, strategically, and with steely resolve, he set his plan in motion. For days, he quietly cut fences with wire cutters hidden beneath the hay. He prepared a cart far from the main house, covered with tarps and branches, tucked around a bend in the dirt road leading to the woods. It was the only chance. And through that same rotten wooden hole in the barn, where it all began, he slipped a carefully folded letter. A short, direct note. Thursday, at dusk. When you hear noise outside, be ready. Run. Don't look back. Trust me. Thursday arrived. The sky was gray, heavy with rain. Low clouds seemed to warn of something inevitable. Thunder cracked in the distance like war drums. This was the day. When the bell rang to mark the end of the workday, the workers began to disperse. Roger knew the back gate would be left slightly open, a usual practice at shift's end. It was now or never. He sprinted across the soaked field, his boots sinking into the mud. Behind the barn, with a crowbar in hand, he pried apart the fragile boards, making a hole the size of a door. The smell of wet wood and mildew filled his nose. At the sight of the light in his face, the women hesitated. Run. Don't look back. There's a cart hidden at the corner. Run. There was a moment of silence, then chaos. The women, dirty, tied up, malnourished, started to move. Some cried. Others could barely walk. But hope flared like wildfire in dry brush. Anna grabbed Cecilia by the shoulders. Martha supported Lucy. Rose cried out for help, but no one faltered. Within minutes, a line of women was running across the open field, soaked by rain, desperate and free. But their screams caught attention. From the manor house, the colonel heard. "What the hell's going on?" he roared, rising from his chair and grabbing his shotgun. With his henchmen, he charged toward the barn, still stunned by the impossible. When they arrived, the colonel saw the women fleeing across the field. "You've signed your death warrant, Roger." The farmer planted himself between the henchmen and the escape path, breathless, covered in mud, but his eyes burning with fire. "If you want to get through, you'll have to kill me." The colonel stepped forward, aiming his shotgun at Roger's chest. But then, the unexpected. A shot sliced through the air, from behind the henchman. It was Bruno, the same man who had threatened Roger. He emerged from the darkness, armed, his face torn between hatred and regret. "That's enough, Colonel. Too many women have been locked up in this hell. I'm done." The colonel turned slowly, eyes flashing. "You'd betray your own blood over a bunch of pregnant women," he bellowed. Before another word could be said, Bruno fired. 2 henchmen dropped, bullets piercing their chests. The third lunged at Bruno with a ferocious scream, and they tumbled to the muddy ground. Bruno's revolver slipped from his hand as he took a punch straight to the face. Blood spurted from his mouth. But he retaliated with a kick to the man's stomach, pushing him against the barn wall. On the other side, Roger came running, grabbing the shotgun from one of the fallen henchmen. He didn't hesitate. He spun the gun around and used it as a club, striking another man coming up behind him. The sound of breaking bone echoed like thunder. The third thug, even wounded, pulled out a knife and lunged at Bruno. They wrestled in the mud, hand to hand, like wild beasts. The blade slashed Bruno's arm, but he struck back with a brutal punch to the man's nose, sending him stumbling to the ground. "Take care of him!" Roger shouted, shooting another one who came out of nowhere. The colonel, furious, fired his pistol at Roger, but missed. The bullet shattered a piece of the cart, exploding it into splinters. The horses reared and panicked. Bruno, bleeding and limping, ran to grab his revolver again and aimed it at the colonel, who was still pointing blindly, rage in his eyes. "Drop the gun, Colonel!" Bruno yelled. "You're a coward, Bruno. A damn weakling," the old man spat. Bruno fired, not to kill, but to shut him up. The bullet hit the colonel's leg and dropped him to the ground. In the silence that followed, the sound of running feet echoed like freedom. "Go, get them out of here before more show up," Bruno gasped, now on his knees, shoulder bleeding, breath shallow. Roger ran to him, dragging him up by the arm. That night, under a stormy sky thick with clouds and the sharp stench of gunpowder and mud, the cart rattled violently up the road. Roger held the reins tight, his face streaked with sweat and dust, his heart racing, not just from adrenaline, but from the weight of what he'd done. Beside him, Bruno, pale and covered in blood, fought to stay conscious. In the back seat, 5 women, all pregnant, dirty, bruised, some with wide, terrified eyes, clung to whatever they could. One of them whispered a prayer. Another kept shouting her daughter's name, left behind. A wheel nearly snapped as the cart rolled over a rock, but the horse kept pushing forward, panting, driven by the urgency of escape. Roger squinted and shouted into the night. "Hold on, Bruno. We're almost there." The gate to Roger's home appeared like a promise. The cart skidded around the bend, flinging up mud. "MOM, Dad, open the door!" Roger screamed, already leaping off the seat and sprinting toward the porch. A lantern flicked on behind the window. The door flew open. "Roger!" "My God!" cried Mrs. Eliza, his mother, her hand flying to her mouth. His father, Ernest, appeared behind her, a coat thrown over his shoulders. But he froze at the sight, women climbing down from the cart, one by one. Pregnant, fragile, covered in bruises and marks around their wrists. Their eyes haunted. And Bruno, hunched over in pain, shoulder bleeding. "My son, what is this?" Ernest shouted. Roger, his eyes brimming with tears, answered between heavy breaths. "It's justice, Dad. It's truth. And it's happening now." The old man didn't ask another word. He rushed to Bruno, grabbing him firmly to support him. "Bring him inside. We'll patch him up. And you ladies, come in, all of you," he said, throwing the doors wide open. Mrs. Eliza was already crying. "My God, they're just girls, big with babies, and locked up where? How?" She started laying blankets across the floor, pulled boiling water from the kettle, grabbed clean cloths. The women came in like shadows, stumbling over their own fear. One dropped to her knees in the kitchen, sobbing. "I thought we were gonna die in there." Another was shaking so badly she could barely walk. Roger hugged his mother, and she held him tightly, her eyes wet. "You did the right thing, son. You were more of a man tonight than most men around here'll ever be." Out on the porch, lit by the lantern's glow, Ernest was cleaning Bruno's shoulder with a rag soaked in alcohol. Bruno grunted in pain, teeth clenched. "This'll hurt, boy. But you're alive. And that means more than anything right now." Bruno nodded, eyes glossy. "I'll never take orders from that bastard again. Never." The dining table, once quiet, was now full, bread, fruit, fresh water, steaming broth. The women ate fast, like their bodies didn't believe there was time. Some cried while chewing. Others just looked around, as if waking from a nightmare. And so, dawn finally came. Later that same night, word spread through the town square. A group of men, led by former allies of justice, men who had once stayed silent but had now awakened, marched straight to the ranch. There was no long trial. No chance to escape. Colonel Sawyer was found trying to sneak out through the back, filthy, covered in dried blood and mud. He was still barking orders, but no one was listening anymore. They handcuffed him in front of everyone, met with jeers and spit. The remaining henchmen were taken down, and one of them broke down sobbing, begging forgiveness from the women he once helped imprison. Justice had arrived, and this time it came in the hands of the people. Days passed. The rain gave way to a shy sun, and the mud dried on the village roads. The heavy silence that once hung over the homes was replaced by laughter from open windows, barefoot children running down dusty streets, and smiles that no longer feared being seen. One by one, the rescued women were returned to their families. Some ran into the arms of mothers who wept just to see them alive. Others reunited with sisters, neighbors, people who thought they'd vanished forever. The ones who had no one left stayed in the village, taken in by families who opened not only their doors, but their hearts. None of them returned to silence, or to being forgotten. Now they had voices and memory. Colonel Sawyer stood trial, not in some far-off court, but right there, in the same village where he'd committed every crime. The testimonies of mothers, wives, sisters, even former allies, were heard by judges who came down from the capital. The evidence was overwhelming. Hidden letters, records, witness accounts, scars on their bodies and on their souls. He was sentenced to life in prison and taken away in handcuffs under the same sky he once believed he ruled. There were no cheers, only the sound of disdain and truth, finally being spoken out loud. Brandon healed from his wound. He walked with some difficulty, but always with his head held high. To the colonel, he was now a traitor. But in the village, he was a quiet hero, the first to take a stand. Many didn't even know exactly what he'd done, but everyone knew that without him, none of it would have happened. Over time, the village began to heal not just his body, but his guilt. And in Roger's heart, something was blooming. Cecilia. She was the one who, on the night they escaped, had held onto the little note he'd scribbled in a rush before it all fell apart. She hadn't run. She'd waited. And she'd kept that paper like someone holding onto a promise. Now free, the two began exchanging shy glances. Then walks, laughter, light touches, long hugs, and finally, kisses full of all the words they'd never been allowed to say. Cecilia had lost nearly everything, except her faith that good men still existed. Roger had never known love. But in her, this woman with a steady gaze and a wounded soul, he found what his parents had always wanted for him, a real family. In time, they rebuilt the old ranch house. Its walls, once soaked in pain, were now filled with voices, the smell of home-cooked meals, and bedsheets flapping in the breeze. One of the rooms, painted soft green and white, had a little wooden crib. Cecilia was expecting. And Roger, the man who once only dreamed of escaping the village, now wanted the whole world to fit inside that house. The ranch became a symbol, a place of refuge, a place of honest work. Many of the men who had once stayed silent now helped out there. They planted, took care of the animals, taught their sons that a real man doesn't rule through fear, he offers shelter. Together, Roger and Cecilia rewrote the story of that land, one brick at a time. And every time the sun set and the chickens returned to their coop, Roger sat on the porch with Cecilia at his side, her belly growing beneath her light dress. "I never thought," he'd say, looking at the sky, "that after all that darkness, we'd get to have this." "We always can," she'd reply, squeezing his hand. "You just have to be brave enough to turn the light on." The village was never the same again. Neither was Roger, nor Cecilia, nor the women who had once been silenced. Now, when someone walks those dusty roads and asks what happened there, they always hear the same story. Right here, a lone rancher kicked down a door. and with it, brought down an entire empire built on silence and cruelty. But what no one ever says, what only the people here truly know, is that he didn't do it alone. He did it with love, with justice, and with the strength of women who refuse to disappear. Because freedom has a face. It has a name. It bleeds, and it dreams. And this story took root. It became a seed, and it bloomed.